You don't belong in this room, Lorelei. You never did. Pack your things and disappear before the board arrives. Augustina Vane, 63-year-old mother of Rhett Vane, pulled a silk blazer from the open garment bag and dropped it onto the marble floor of the Ashwood Grand's presidential suite. The fabric landed in a heap beside the shoes, already scattered across the cream-colored tile. Everard Vane, 67-year-old father of Rhett and public chairman of Kingsley Hotel Group, picked up the second jacket from the rack near the window and hung it on the balcony railing as if it were a rag. Lorelei Ashby Vane, 36-year-old wife of Rhett, stood near the center of the room and said nothing. Rhett Vane, 41-year-old husband of Lorelei and executive vice president of Kingsley Hotel Group, watched his parents dismantle his wife's belongings without lifting a hand to stop them. Beside him stood Camille Drace, 35-year-old vice president of brand development at Kingsley and Rhett's Mistress, with a look on her face that belonged to a woman already measuring the room for new furniture. Lorelei's eyes moved slowly from her blazer on the floor to the documents on the suite table, a legal folder, a pen placed neatly beside it. The Vanes believed the quiet woman standing in front of them owned nothing more than a respectable last name and a kind heart. Rhett did not know Lorelei was the sole heir of her late grandfather Silas Ashby, the private real estate billionaire whose holdings included land, commercial developments, and investment trusts spanning 14 states. He did not know she was the controlling owner of Ashby Capital Trust, or that Ashby Capital held a 74% ownership stake in Meridian Lodging Partners, the parent company that had quietly acquired a majority of Kingsley Hotel Group's debt and equity during its near collapse 2 years earlier. He certainly did not know that the hotel his father still called his own had been kept alive by the woman he was preparing to remove from it. 18 months before that moment in the suite, Lorelei had learned that Kingsley was 3 weeks from defaulting on its loan obligations. The group owed money to suppliers, contractors, and a union pension fund representing more than 4,000 housekeeping and maintenance workers. She had authorized Ashby Capital to begin acquiring Kingsley's distressed debt quietly, protect the union contracts, and restructure the balance sheet under a recovery agreement that allowed Everard to remain public chairman so that lenders and employees would not lose confidence in the brand. She had saved the company without telling her husband. Now, Rhett placed his hand over the legal folder and looked at her. "This doesn't have to be ugly," he said. "Open the door," Lorelei said. "I'll get my things, myself." Augustina moved between her and the garment bag. "We'll check first." Lorelei looked at her. "For what? For what belongs to this family?" Harmon Vane, 38-year-old brother of Rhett and Kingsley's director of operations, shifted near the far wall without speaking. Camille straightened her bracelet. A thin gold chain at her wrist caught the light from the tall windows overlooking the hotel courtyard. Lorelei recognized the shape of the clasp. She had helped Rhett choose that design 8 months ago. He had told her it was a thank-you gift for a retiring board member who had served Kingsley for 25 years. He had asked Lorelei to select something understated, something the woman would actually wear. Camille's wrist moved again. The clasp turned in the light, and Lorelei could read the engraving on the inner edge. "For see, the foundation begins at Ashwood." R.V. Augustina reached into the garment bag. "Don't touch that," Lorelei said. "You came into this family with a cardigan and a good attitude," Augustina replied without turning around. "You can leave the same way." Everard lifted a folded dress from the bag and set it on the balcony railing beside the blazer. The morning wind took the edge of the fabric and pulled it briefly before letting it settle. Lorelei watched it. The Vanes had brought her to Ashwood Grand that morning under the language of a family conversation. A chance to talk privately before the board's quarterly meeting. Rhett had used the word reconciliation. He had said he wanted to handle everything with dignity. 17 people were now standing in the room. The legal folder on the table contained a separation agreement and a petition for divorce. Everard's attorney, a man named Cravath Hollins, had placed it there before Lorelei arrived, and had excused himself to wait in the hallway, which told Lorelei everything about what kind of conversation this was meant to be. "Sign the agreement," Everard said. "The terms are fair." "I haven't read them," Lorelei said. "Cravath drafted it carefully. You keep your personal accounts. We keep what belongs to Kingsley. Then I'll have my attorney read it." Augustina turned from the garment bag with a cream-colored blouse in her hand. She held it for a moment. Then she threw it. The fabric struck Lorelei across the side of her face before falling to the floor. No one in the room moved. Rhett looked at his shoes. Lorelei touched her cheek. The edge of the cuff button had caught the skin just below her eye. She felt the heat of it before the sting arrived. She did not cry. She did not shout. She picked up her blazer from the floor and folded it over her arm. "My attorney will contact yours," she said. Then she walked to the door. She did not know the suite's interior recording system required under Ashwood Grand's corporate events policy for all presidential-level business meetings, had captured every second of what happened. She did not know the hotel's general manager, a careful woman named Odessa Fairfax, had already flagged the recording for preservation the moment Everard began removing Lorelei's clothes from the garment bag. She did not know that the Vannies, by staging this in a corporate event suite, had given her everything she would need. 2 years before the morning in the suite, Kingsley Hotel Group had not looked like a company worth saving. Everard Vane had built the brand over 3 decades by acquiring mid-tier properties and rebranding them as luxury destinations. The strategy worked for a long time. Then he borrowed too aggressively to expand into 4 new markets simultaneously. The financing came due faster than the new properties could generate returns, and Kingsley's cash reserves ran dry before any of the new hotels opened their doors. Lorelei had learned about the collapse not from Rhett, but from her grandfather's investment team. Silas Ashby had died 14 months before Kingsley's crisis, leaving Lorelei the controlling interest in Ashby Capital Trust. She had grown up understanding the shape of the business without being paraded through it. Silas had kept her identity private deliberately, using her mother's surname through school and early adulthood, introducing her at trust events simply as his granddaughter, never as his successor. He had told her once that the people who treated her well before they knew what she owned were the only people worth keeping. She had thought about that the first time she met Rhett. He had been at a hotel conference, representing Kingsley on a panel about sustainable renovation practices. Lorelei had been attending under her mother's name, observing the session as part of her trust's due diligence review of hospitality sector investments. During the break, a catering worker had knocked a display table and sent a tray of coffee cups across the floor. Everyone around her moved back. Rhett moved forward. He helped the worker gather the cups, checked that no one had been burned, and flagged a hotel staff member to bring a dry cloth. He had not glanced toward the cameras covering the conference floor. He had not looked around to see if anyone important was watching. That was the man she had married. She still looked for him sometimes in the man Rhett had become. When Ashby Capital's team flagged Kingsley's distressed debt as a potential acquisition target, Lorelei had asked for time before making a decision. She had sat with the numbers for 3 days. The group's real estate assets had value. The brand had recognition. The workers who kept the properties running had done nothing wrong and would lose their retirement contributions if Kingsley was liquidated. And at the center of the company was her husband, who had come home from work pale and exhausted the previous month and told her he was terrified that his father's errors were going to cost thousands of people their livelihoods. She had held him while he said it. Then she had gone into her office and called her trust attorney, a woman named Viva Stanton, and authorized the acquisition. The recovery agreement gave Everard a protected chairmanship for 24 months. It allowed the Vane family's name to remain publicly associated with Kingsley's leadership during the transition. It protected every union contract, every pension contribution, and every supplier payment. Ashby Capital did not announce its majority position publicly, which meant Laura spent the next 18 months watching her in-laws treat her as a woman who needed their tolerance while she quietly held the floor beneath their feet. She never told Rhett. Before their marriage, she had explained to him that her grandfather had left her a private investment trust. He had asked a few questions about the size of it, seemed satisfied with the vague answer she gave, and moved on. He had never pressed further. She had never volunteered more. She had wanted to understand who he was without the weight of it between them. Now she understood. The suite at Ashwood Grand was on the 14th floor. Lorelei rode the service elevator down with Odessa Fairfax and stepped into the back corridor that led to the hotel's secondary exit. Her driver, a steady man named Arthur, was already waiting near the rear gate. Viva Stanton arrived at Lorelei's apartment 40 minutes later, carrying a briefcase and a look on her face that could cut glass. "Tell me exactly what happened," Viva said. Lorelei told her. Augustina and the garment bag. Everard and the balcony railing. The blouse across her face. Rhett watching the floor. The bracelet on Camille's wrist. Viva set down her coffee without drinking it. "I'm issuing evidence preservation notices to Kingsley and to Ashwood Grand before midnight." "Not yet," Lorelei said. "Lorelei, I want the audit finished first." She looked at the mark below her eye in the window's reflection. The redness had not faded. "I want everything documented before we move. I want it to be about what they did to the company, not about what they did to me." Viva looked at her for a long moment. "Those things are not separate, I know. But the order matters." The audit had been underway for 6 weeks. Ashby Capital's independent review team had flagged irregularities in Kingsley's expense reporting 4 months earlier. Travel billed as brand development. Event costs coded as property maintenance. a renovation on Everard's private estate in Connecticut, whose invoices appeared in Kingsley's capital improvement ledger. 3 international trips taken by Rhett and Camille together, each classified as partnership development, each staying in adjoining suites at Kingsley-owned properties, each approved by an expense system that answered to Rhett himself. The audit team had found something else that week, a payment of $1.4 million scheduled to leave Kingsley's operating account in 11 days, routed to a holding company Cravath Hollins had incorporated 3 months earlier. The payment description read, Legacy Transition Advisory. There was no advisory agreement on file. There was no corresponding service. Stop that transfer, Lorelei told the lead auditor, a careful man named Brennick Souls, when he called that evening. Freeze everything connected to that account. Done, he said. There's more. I know, she said. Keep going. The board had not been told that Ashby Capital held a majority position in Kingsley. The recovery agreement had structured the acquisition through a holding layer that gave the Vane family the appearance of continued operational control during the protected period. That period expired in 19 days. When it did, Lorelei did not need to stage a takeover. She simply needed to stop protecting people who had stopped deserving it. Rhett sent 3 messages during the 2 days after the suite. The first asked whether she had retained separate counsel or planned to use the same firm. The second said Cravath needed her signature on the separation agreement before the board's quarterly meeting. The third said he hoped they could remain professional and resolve the matter without involving outside parties. Camille had been sitting beside him when he wrote all 3. Lorelei learned this later from the audit team's review of building access logs and device records obtained through the investigation's legal process. Camille had suggested removing the word sorry from the first draft of the second message. She had said it created legal exposure. Lorelei forwarded all 3 messages to Veva without responding. Veva reviewed the separation agreement line by line. Everard's prenuptial terms protected both spouses' inherited and separate property, she said. He thought he was shielding the Vane family from you. Instead, he shielded everything your grandfather left you from his son. Lorelei almost smiled. The trust assets are untouchable, Veva continued. Rhett's attorney either doesn't know what he's asking you to sign, or he does know and he's hoping you don't. Lorelei looked at the agreement on the table. Garrick had believed the same thing about Marin in a different hotel 2 years ago, except this wasn't that story. This was her own. She closed the folder. When can the independent directors convene? Viva checked her calendar. I can have a quorum in 72 hours. Do it. The special committee meeting took place in a private conference facility 3 blocks from Kingsley's headquarters. None of the directors had a financial or personal relationship with the Vane family. Lorelei had insisted on that separation before the recovery agreement was signed. She stood at the head of the table and made her disclosure in 4 sentences. She was married to Rhett Vane. He had filed for divorce. His parents had humiliated her at Ashwood Grand in the presence of corporate executives and employees. She was also the controlling owner of Ashby Capital Trust, which held a 74% majority position in Meridian Lodging Partners, the company that had acquired Kingsley Hotel Group during its restructuring. The room was quiet for several seconds after she finished. I will not participate in any vote concerning Rhett's employment or compensation, she said. I will not cast a vote on Camille Dressy's position or any matter involving their relationship. I am asking this committee to follow the evidence, protect the workers, and document its conclusions with precision. She left before the first witness was called. The review took 3 weeks. Investigators examined expense records, corporate card statements, property audit reports, building access logs, device records, and internal communications going back 27 months. What they found was not complicated. It was simply large. Everard had approved personal estate renovations using Kingsley's capital improvement budget, misclassified resort and entertainment expenses as property hospitality costs, used the company's union contractor relationships to perform work on private family properties, and directed accounting staff to reclassify rejected expenses when they were initially flagged as unsupported. When 2 employees in the finance department raised questions about the renovation invoices, Everard called their supervisor and told him the questions reflected a misunderstanding of executive hospitality policy. Both employees had preserved their original objection memos. Both agreed to provide written statements. Rhett had approved Camille's travel expenses across 11 business trips. He had authorized hotel charges that included spa treatments, jewelry purchases, and private dining events coded as brand partner dinners. He had used Kingsley's event staff to arrange a private birthday party for Camille in a suite at the company's flagship New York property. He had also, according to recovered internal messages, known about Everard's renovation charges for at least 8 months, and done nothing. Camille had submitted the expense reports herself. She had written the descriptions. She had approved her own travel invoices under a dual approval system that should have required a second signature from Rhett, which he had provided for every single entry. Harmon had approved 3 transfers to the Hollins Holding Company without documentation. The director of communications, a sharp-featured man named Wexler Fane, had created internal memos framing all of it as standard executive hospitality practice and had begun drafting an external press narrative designed to position Lorelei as a bitter spouse attempting to damage the company out of personal grievance. He had drafted it on a Kingsley-owned device. The audit team had it. On the evening before the protected chairmanship expired, Lorelei returned to the apartment and sat in the same chair she had sat in the night after the suite. She opened the small box on the side table where she kept the things that mattered. Inside was a photograph from the conference where she met Rhett. Someone in the audience had taken it during the break. He was kneeling on the floor beside the catering worker, cups scattered around them both, his face turned down in concentration, unhurried and unperforming. She looked at it for a long time. That version of him had been real. She believed that. She was not going to erase it simply because it ended here. But a photograph from 8 years ago could not excuse 8 months of silence, 11 trips, a bracelet, and a legal folder dropped on a table in a corporate hotel suite while his mother threw her clothes across the floor. She placed the photograph back in the box and signed the public disclosure authorization. The quarterly board meeting at Kingsley's headquarters began at 9 in the morning. Everard arrived with Augustina, Rhett, Camille, Harmon and Wexler, all of them moving through the lobby with the loose confidence of people who believed the morning had already been decided. Their access badges worked in the elevator. They had been permitted to enter the building so the committee's notifications could be delivered formally, in person, with legal representation present. That was the only reason. Everard did not know this. He walked directly toward the chairman's seat at the head of the boardroom table and pulled it out. The door opened before he could sit. Brennick entered first, followed by 2 members of the independent committee. Behind them walked Lorelei. She wore a charcoal blazer and flat shoes. Her hair was down. There were no visible signs of what had happened in the suite, except for the faint mark below her eye that had not fully faded. She carried nothing that announced who she was. She did not need to. Everard straightened. "What is the meaning of this?" Brennick set a document on the table in front of him. "Your protected chairmanship under the Ashby Capital Recovery Agreement expired at midnight. This is your formal notice of transition." Everard did not take the paper. "I built this company." "You built it and then required another party to rescue it," Brennick said. "The rescue agreement governed your authority during the protected period. That period has ended." Everard looked at Lorelei. "What does she have to do with any of this?" "Everything," Brennick said. He turned to address the room. "Lorelei Ashby Vane is the controlling owner of Ashby Capital Trust. Ashby Capital controls Meridian Lodging Partners, which holds a 74% majority equity and debt position in Kingsley Hotel Group." Augustina's mouth opened. Rhett stood perfectly still. "That's impossible," Augustina said. She's been the majority owner for 18 months, Brennick said, during which time her trust covered Kingsley's restructured debt, protected the union pension fund, secured supplier contracts, and prevented what would have been a full liquidation of the company. The room was quiet. Lorelei looked at Rhett. He was staring at her, as though he were trying to locate something he recognized. "Your grandfather," he said. "Silas Ashby," she said. "You never asked what was in the trust. You let me believe it was small." "You decided it was small," she said. "I told you my grandfather left me a private trust managed by professionals. You heard what you expected to hear." Everard had recovered enough to become angry. "You've been running a shadow operation inside my company for 18 months, and you never disclosed it." "The recovery agreement's terms govern disclosure," Brennick replied before Lorelei could answer. She was not required to disclose publicly until the protected chairmanship ended. It ended at midnight. "She's my son's wife. She's the majority owner. Those are 2 different things." Lorelei finally spoke again. "I saved this company because the workers deserve to keep their jobs. The pension fund represented 4,000 people who had nothing to do with your financing decisions. I was not going to let them pay for your mistakes." Everard pointed toward the door. "She has a personal grievance against this family. Anything she's initiating now is retaliation for the divorce." "The divorce petition was filed by your son," Brennick said. "The audit investigation began 6 weeks before that, based on irregularities our team identified through routine financial review." Lorelei disclosed her marriage and her recusal from all related votes at the committee's first meeting. Every action taken by this committee has been documented separately from the divorce proceedings. Camille looked at Rhett. You told me she had nothing, I thought. You told me the trust was a small account, a few investment funds. Rhett's jaw tightened. He did not finish the sentence. Carveth Hollins stepped forward from the wall where he had been standing. I need to speak with my client privately before. Your client is Everard Vane, Brennick said. Rhett is represented separately. I'd recommend both of them contact their counsel immediately, because the committee's findings are significant. Alden Price, Ashby Capital's outside corporate counsel, stepped forward with a second set of documents. He addressed Everard first. The committee's findings include misclassification of personal estate renovations as capital improvements, use of union contractor relationships for private family property work, and pressure applied to accounting employees who raised compliance concerns. The independent directors will present a full recommendation to the reconstituted board within 10 business days. He addressed Rhett next. Your employment has been suspended pending final committee review. The findings include approval of unsupported travel expenses, authorization of personal events using company resources, documented concealment of a related party relationship with a direct report, and failure to act on written compliance warnings received 8 months ago. He addressed Camille. Your employment ended at midnight. The committee verified that the expense descriptions submitted under your name contain material misrepresentations. Your appeal rights are outlined in the written decision. He addressed Harmon. You are suspended pending review of 3 unauthorized transfers. He addressed Wexler last. Your employment ended at midnight. Investigators recovered a draft press narrative prepared on a company device under a litigation preservation hold. The content of that draft also figures in the committee's findings. Wexler's face went still. I never sent it. The attempt and the records constitute a violation of the preservation notice, Alden said. Your counsel may review the specifics through formal process. Augustina stepped toward Lorelei. After everything we did for you. Lorelei looked at her steadily. You threw my clothes on the floor of a corporate suite and then threw a blouse into my face because you believed it was safe to do that. You believed I had no power, and you acted accordingly. What I want you to understand is that it would have been wrong even if you had been right about me. Augustina opened her mouth. The dignity of a person is not a function of their bank balance, Lorelei said. You taught me that by treating me as though it were. The reporters who had been invited to cover a scheduled ownership transition announcement were gathered in the lobby. They had not been brought there to witness the Vane family's removal. The Vane family, shouting as it carried from the boardroom into the open corridor, took care of that on its own. Several phones came out in the lobby. Everard followed Lorelei into the hallway. You let my family humiliate you without saying a word. Why? She stopped walking and turned to face him. Because I wanted to know what each of you would do when you believed I had nothing, she said. I didn't arrange a test. I just watched. And you answered. She left the hallway before he could respond. The aftermath moved the way consequences always do, not in one dramatic instant, but steadily the way water works through stone. Everard's estate renovation charges became the subject of a civil recovery action filed by the reconstituted board. His personal guarantees on several of Kingsley's restructured liabilities gave lenders standing to accelerate repayment when his financial irregularities became public. He sold the Connecticut property 3 months later to cover the initial judgment. The man who had spent 30 years calling Kingsley his company ended the year without a seat on its board, without access to its accounts, and without the private equity stake he had planned to pass to his sons. Rhett's suspension became a permanent termination after the committee's full review was submitted. He applied for director-level roles at 2 competing hotel groups and was not offered either position. He moved out of the executive residence Kingsley had provided and into an apartment in a building he could afford on his personal savings. He sold his car to cover legal fees during the divorce proceeding. The separation agreement he had asked Lorelei to sign, the one Cravath had drafted to protect the Vane family's assets, applied equally to both spouses under its own terms. Lorelei's inheritance was untouched. Rhett kept what had been his before the marriage, which was less than he remembered. Camille's claim that she had merely followed her supervisor's instructions collapsed when investigators produced the original expense submissions in her own words. She lost her position and filed a separate grievance, which the committee addressed through written findings. She and Rhett stopped speaking before the divorce was finalized. He had been her path to something she wanted. When the path closed, so did the conversation. Harmon cooperated with the committee's investigation and provided information about Everard's financial directives in exchange for a reduced finding. He was not terminated, but was removed from operational authority. He spent the following months giving statements to two separate sets of attorneys. Wexler's draft press narrative became an exhibit in the committee's report and was later referenced in a trade publication article about internal communications during corporate investigations. He did not work in communications again that year. The workers were protected throughout. Lorelei had required it as a condition of authorizing any transition action. Pension contributions were secured. Supplier contracts remained active. No housekeeping, maintenance, front desk, or kitchen employee lost their job because of the investigation. A profit-sharing program, approved by the new board, allowed workers to benefit directly when Kingsley's properties met occupancy targets. Lorelei appointed Brennick as the independent chairman and asked a longtime Kingsley general manager named Odessa Fairfax, the same woman who had preserved the suite recording, to serve as interim CEO. Odessa understood the properties, respected the people who ran them, and had spent years watching the Vane family treat the company as a personal extension of their lifestyle. She knew exactly what it needed. Lorelei remained the controlling owner of Ashby Capital Trust and said very little publicly about any of it. The divorce was finalized 6 months after the boardroom confrontation. On the morning the paperwork cleared, Rhett sent a letter, not to Veva, directly to Lorelei. He did not ask her to reconsider. He did not blame Camille or his parents or the situation. He wrote that he had spent the previous months trying to understand how a man who had once knelt on a conference room floor to help a stranger pick up coffee cups had become a man who stood in a hotel suite and watched his mother throw his wife's clothes at her face. He said he did not have a complete answer. He said he understood that not having an answer was its own kind of answer. He wrote that he finally understood why an apology could not repair the marriage. He was sorry anyway. Lorelei read the letter twice. She put it in the box with the photograph. She did not answer, but she did not throw it away. Several months after the transition, Kingsley's 4,000 unionized employees gathered in the ballroom of the company's Chicago flagship property for an annual recognition event. The room was the largest in the building. Housekeepers, bell staff, kitchen workers, maintenance technicians, front desk employees, and event coordinators filled the space in a way that made it feel full in the way a building is supposed to feel full. Not with power, but with the actual people who make a place work. Odessa introduced Lorelei simply, without a long preamble, as the person whose decision had kept the company intact. A senior maintenance technician named Galt Priory, 54, who had worked for Kingsley for 29 years, stepped forward before anyone else could speak. He said he had been 4 months from retirement when the restructuring rumors started. He said he had not known who to believe. He said he had kept coming to work every morning because he did not know what else to do. "I know now," he said, looking at Lorelei, "that someone made a decision for people like me who didn't know she was making it. I'm grateful for that. I want to say so out loud." Lorelei stood at the edge of the platform and looked across the room. "No company belongs to the name above the door," she said. "It belongs to the people who keep the doors open. I want you to know that I understood that before anything else." The applause was not the loud kind. It was the kind that comes from a room full of people who have been through something difficult and are relieved to be standing on the other side of it. Lorelei stepped down from the platform afterward and stood near the back of the room for a long time, watching the staff move through the space with the ease of people who knew they still had a place in it. She had not won by being discovered. She had won because she had known her own value long before anyone else was forced to learn it. That had been her grandfather's real lesson. Not the trust, not the portfolio, not the recovery agreement, or the audit, or the majority stake. The lesson was that the people who treated you as less, in the years when they believed it was safe to do so, were revealing something true about themselves, and the people who could make themselves small in order to love someone honestly, in the hope of being loved the same way in return, were not weak. They were simply choosing, every day, to believe that someone was worth that kind of love. Rhett had not been. She had finally stopped choosing him. She took the elevator to the highest floor of the Chicago property, found a window that faced the lake, and watched the lights of the city below her. The wind was moving across the water in long, flat lines. Aircraft lights moved slowly through the dark above it. She stayed there until the building settled into quiet. Then she went home.